the bullet ricocheting off the wall behind the man, but it didn't slow him down. "Get back!" Clara shouted, pulling out the dagger they had used to seal the gate. Its faint glow pulsed brighter as she drove it into the man's chest. He let out a guttural scream, collapsing to the ground as black smoke poured from the wound, dissolving into the air. For a moment, silence fell over the hallway. Then the whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever. "What the hell was that?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. "A guardian," Elliot replied grimly. "Something left behind to protect the mirror. If we're dealing with things like that, we're definitely in the right place." Following the trail of symbols etched into the walls, they eventually reached a set of heavy wooden doors, reinforced with iron bars. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and the temperature dropped noticeably as they pushed the doors open. Inside was a circular chamber, illuminated by an otherworldly blue light emanating from the center of the room. Suspended above a pedestal was the Mirror of Echoes, a large ornate mirror framed in twisted black metal. Its surface shimmered like liquid mercury, reflecting not their images, but shifting scenes of shadowy figures and cryptic symbols. Clara approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is it," she whispered, "the Mirror of Echoes." Elliot consulted the book, flipping through the pages until he found the passage detailing how to use the artifact. According to this, the mirror reveals the truth about those who gaze into it, but only if you're willing to confront your deepest fears. "And if we're not?" Marcus asked warily. "Then it consumes you," Elliot replied bluntly. "Literally. Your soul gets trapped within the reflection, feeding the shadows." Clara swallowed hard, steeling herself. "We don't have a choice. We need answers." She stepped closer to the mirror, her reflection rippling as if disturbed by unseen waves. Taking a deep breath, she locked eyes with her own image, and immediately wished she hadn't. The Clara staring back at her wasn't the same person. Her reflection smiled cruelly, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Behind her stood shadowy figures, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. They wanted her to join them. "You belong to us," the reflection whispered, its voice overlapping with the whispers already echoing in her mind. "Always have, always will." Clara stumbled backward, breaking eye contact. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "What did you see?" Marcus asked urgently, kneeling beside her. "I saw," Clara began, struggling to form words. "I saw myself, but different. Like the shadows had already claimed me." Elliot frowned, glancing at the mirror nervously. "It's showing you your potential fate. If we don't stop them, that's what you'll become." Determined to uncover the truth, Clara forced herself to stand and face the mirror again. This time, instead of focusing on her reflection, she concentrated on the shifting scenes behind it. Slowly, the images coalesced into something recognizable. A map of Black Hollow, marked with locations where the cult's rituals had taken place, and one spot that hadn't been active yet. "There," Clara said, pointing to the map reflected in the mirror. "That's where they're planning their next move." Elliot quickly sketched the location onto a piece of paper, while Marcus kept a wary eye on the doorway. "We should go," he said tensely. "I don't like the feeling of this place." As they turned to leave, the mirror's surface rippled violently, and a shadowy tendril shot out, wrapping itself around Clara's ankle. She cried out in pain as it yanked her backward, dragging her toward the reflective surface. "Help me!" she screamed, clawing at the floor. Marcus and Elliot grabbed her arms, pulling with all their strength. The tendril tightened its grip, and the mirror's light flared blindingly bright. In a desperate act, Clara pulled out the dagger and slashed at the tendril. It recoiled with a shriek, releasing her as the mirror cracked violently. The chamber shook, debris raining down from the ceiling. Without hesitation, the trio bolted for the exit, narrowly avoiding being crushed as the asylum began to collapse around them. Once outside, they paused to catch their breath, the ruins of the asylum smoldering behind them. Clara clutched the sketch of the map tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. "Now we know where they're going," she said, determination burning in her eyes. "But we'll need reinforcements if we're going to stop them." Marcus nodded. "I'll call Sheriff Grayson. He owes us that much, at least." Elliot hesitated, his expression troubled. Even if we gather everyone we trust, it might not be enough. The shadows are growing stronger, and they'll stop at nothing to reopen the gate. Clara met his gaze, her voice firm. Then we fight harder. For Emily, for Black Hollow, for everyone. We can't let them win. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Clara knew the battle ahead would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But one thing was certain. The shadows were closing in, and the final confrontation was inevitable. The map sketch from the Mirror of Echoes led Clara, Marcus, and Elliot to an abandoned quarry on the outskirts of Black Hollow. A desolate expanse of jagged rocks and deep pits that seemed to swallow the light whole. It was a place forgotten by time, its silence oppressive and unnatural. As they approached, the air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of sulfur and decay. Clara tightened her grip on the dagger, its faint glow pulsing rhythmically as if responding to the growing presence of the shadows. Her mind raced with questions. Who was orchestrating this new ritual? Was Elias somehow still involved, or had someone else taken his place as the cult's leader? And most importantly, how far were they willing to go to stop them? "We're not alone," Marcus said suddenly, his voice low but urgent. He motioned toward a cluster of trees where several hooded figures stood watching them silently. Their faces were obscured, but their glowing eyes betrayed their otherworldly nature. "Stay sharp," Clara whispered, her voice steady despite the unease clawing at her chest. "Whatever happens, don't let them separate us." Elliot adjusted the strap of his satchel, clutching the ancient book tightly. "If we're going to disrupt the ritual, we'll need to act fast. Once the gate starts opening, it'll be nearly impossible to close again." As they moved closer to the quarry, the whispers in Clara's mind grew louder, almost deafening. They formed a cacophony of voices overlapping and contradictory, each one urging her to give in, to surrender to the darkness. She clenched her jaw, focusing on the task ahead. Giving in wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. At the center of the quarry stood a massive stone altar surrounded by candles flickering unnaturally, despite the absence of wind. Carved into the altar was the same symbol they had encountered before, the sigil of the cult of the Whispering Shadows. Around it, hooded figures chanted in unison, their voices rising and falling like waves crashing against a shore. One figure stepped forward, removing their hood to reveal a face Clara recognized instantly. Sheriff Grayson. "You!" Clara spat, her voice filled with betrayal and anger. "All this time you knew." Grayson's expression was grim, his eyes clouded with regret. "I didn't have a choice, Clara. They threatened my family, my town. If I didn't cooperate, they would have destroyed everything." "So you sold us out," Marcus demanded, his tone laced with disbelief. "You helped them plan this?" "I tried to protect you," Grayson insisted, his voice breaking. "But the shadows, they're relentless. They always find a way." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. The chanting grew louder, the symbols carved into the altar glowing with an eerie light. A dark mist rose from the cracks in the earth, swirling around the altar until it coalesced into a towering, shadowy figure, larger and more menacing than any they had encountered before. "It's starting," Elliot murmured, flipping frantically through the pages of the book. "We need to break the connection now." Clara didn't hesitate. With a surge of adrenaline, she charged toward the altar, dodging the grasping tendrils of the shadowy figure. The cultists turned their attention to her, raising their weapons, a mix of knives and ceremonial daggers. But she was faster. Using the energy emanating from the mark on her palm, which had reappeared, faint but unmistakable, she drove the dagger into the base of the altar. A blinding flash of light erupted from the impact, momentarily stunning everyone within range. The shadowy figure let out an ear-splitting scream, its form flickering as the ritual faltered. But it wasn't enough to destroy it completely. "Keep going!" Elliot shouted, holding up the book. "There's more!" "Recite these words." Clara glanced at him briefly, then nodded. She began reciting the incantation written in the book, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Each word felt heavy, weighted with power, and as she spoke, The symbols on the altar began to crack and crumble. The shadowy figure roared in fury, lashing out with renewed strength. Its tendrils wrapped around Clara's arms and legs, pulling her backward. Pain shot through her body as the shadows burned her skin, but she refused to stop chanting. The others joined in, their voices combining with hers to amplify the spell. Grayson, overcome with guilt, lunged forward to help. He tackled one of the cultists attempting to attack Clara, buying her precious seconds to finish the incantation. When the final word left her lips, the altar shattered completely, sending shockwaves rippling outward. The shadowy figure let out one last guttural scream before dissolving into nothingness. The cultists collapsed to the ground, unconscious or dead, their connection to the shadows severed. For a moment there was silence. Then slowly, the whispers in Clara's mind faded, replaced by a profound stillness that left her both relieved and uneasy. The survivors regrouped near the edge of the quarry, their bodies battered but alive. Clara sat on a rock, her hands trembling as she stared at the dagger in her lap. The mark on her palm was fading once again, its glow dimmer than ever. "What now?" Marcus asked, his voice weary but resolute. "Now," Clara replied softly, "we prepare for whatever comes next, because this isn't over." Elliot nodded grimly. "The shadows may be weakened, but they'll never truly disappear. Someone will always try to bring them back." Grayson hung his head in shame, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "I'm sorry," he muttered, "for everything." Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You made your choice, Sheriff. Now live with it, and make sure it doesn't happen again." As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara felt a sense of cautious optimism. They had won this battle, but the war against the shadows was far from finished, and deep down, she knew the true cost of their victory had yet to be revealed. Weeks passed, and life in Black Hollow returned to a semblance of normalcy. The townsfolk went about their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the horrors that had unfolded just beyond their doorstep. Clara, Marcus, and Elliot continued their work, keeping a vigilant eye out for any signs of the cult's resurgence. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching her. The whispers, though faint, lingered at the edges of her consciousness, whispering promises of return. One evening, while reviewing case files in her apartment, Clara noticed something odd. A photograph of Emily Carter lying on her desk. She was certain she hadn't placed it there. As she reached for it, the image shifted, revealing a message scrawled on the back in jagged handwriting. "The shadows are patient." Clara froze, her heart pounding. She turned off the lights, plunging the room into darkness. But even in the absence of illumination, she could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon her. And somewhere, deep within the forest, the whispers began anew. The photograph of Emily Carter haunted Clara, not because of its image, but because of the message scrawled on the back. "The shadows are patient." Those 4 words echoed in her mind like a mantra, a reminder that their victory had been fleeting at best. No matter how many times she tried to convince herself that the danger was over, the whispers refused to be silenced. Clara spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, her thoughts consumed by questions she couldn't answer. Who had left the photograph? Was it a warning or merely a taunt? And what did it mean, the shadows being patient? Were they biding their time, waiting for humanity to lower its guard? By day, she threw herself into her work, reviewing case files and patrolling the streets of Black Hollow. But by night, the whispers returned with renewed intensity, weaving through her dreams like insidious threads. In these visions, she found herself standing in the forest again, surrounded by shadowy figures whose glowing eyes pierced through the darkness. They didn't speak, they simply watched, their presence suffocating. One particularly vivid nightmare left her gasping for air as she bolted upright in bed. Her hands trembled as she reached for the glass of water on her nightstand. But when she turned on the lamp beside her, she froze. On the wall opposite her bed, faint symbols glowed softly, etched not into the paint, but seemingly into the very fabric of reality itself. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered groggily after several rings. "Clara?" Do you know what time it is? Get over here, she said urgently, her voice trembling. Now. 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived at her apartment, his expression shifting from irritation to concern when he saw the symbols glowing on her wall. Elliot joined them shortly after, clutching the ancient book in one hand and a flashlight in the other. These aren't random carvings, Elliot murmured, tracing the outlines of the symbols with his fingers. They're markers, a sign that the shadows are trying to communicate. Communicate, Clara snapped, her frustration boiling over. Or torment me. Elliot hesitated before nodding. Both, possibly. These symbols are similar to the ones we've encountered before, but there's something different about them. It's almost as if they're evolving. That makes no sense, Marcus interjected, pacing the room. How can shadows evolve? They're not alive. They feed off energy, Clara said quietly, her gaze fixed on the glowing marks. And right now, they're feeding off mine. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Every encounter with the shadows, every ritual disrupted, every battle fought, it hadn't weakened them. Instead, it had strengthened their connection to her. She wasn't just fighting against them, she was becoming part of their world. Over the next few days, the symbols spread, not only in Clara's apartment, but throughout Black Hollow. They appeared on trees, buildings, even gravestones, each one glowing faintly under the cover of darkness. The townsfolk began noticing them too, though most dismissed them as graffiti or vandalism. Only Clara, Marcus, and Elliot understood their true significance. This isn't good, Marcus muttered as they examined a freshly carved symbol on the side of a church. If people start asking questions, we won't be able to keep this quiet much longer. We don't have a choice, Clara replied grimly. If panic sets in, it'll only make things worse. Elliot flipped through the pages of the ancient book, searching for answers. There's something else going on here, he said finally, his voice tense. These symbols, they're not just warnings. They're coordinates. Coordinates? Clara asked sharply. To what? To another gate, Elliot explained, pointing to a diagram in the book. If the shadows are marking locations, it means they're planning to reopen multiple portals simultaneously. And if that happens, it'll be chaos, Clara finished for him, her stomach sinking. We need to find out where these gates are and stop them before it's too late. Using the coordinates provided by the symbols, Clara, Marcus, and Elliot traced the first potential gate to an abandoned temple hidden deep within the mountains surrounding Black Hollow. According to local legend, the temple had once been a place of worship for an ancient civilization believed to have communed with spirits. But as they approached the site, it became clear that the legends were rooted in truth and danger. The temple was constructed entirely of black stone, its towering spires reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Strange carvings adorned its walls, depicting scenes of rituals and sacrifices eerily similar to those performed by the cult of the Whispering Shadows. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of incense and decay. This place gives me the creeps, Marcus whispered, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. Feels like we're being watched. You are, came a voice from the shadows. Before any of them could react, a figure emerged from the gloom. It was a woman clad in tattered robes, her face obscured by a veil. In one hand, she held a staff topped with a crystal that pulsed with dark energy. In the other, a dagger identical to the one Clara carried. Who are you? Clara demanded, raising her own weapon defensively. I am the Keeper of Secrets, the woman replied, her voice echoing unnaturally. And you have trespassed upon sacred ground. We're not here to fight, Clara said firmly, though her grip on the dagger tightened. We're here to stop the shadows. The woman tilted her head, studying them intently. You cannot stop what has already begun. The shadows have chosen you, Detective Hayes. To resist is futile. With that, she raised her staff, and the ground beneath their feet began to tremble violently. Cracks spread across the floor, releasing tendrils of black smoke that coiled around them like living serpents. Clara reacted instinctively, driving her dagger into the nearest tendril. A burst of light erupted from the impact, temporarily dispelling the shadows, but it wasn't enough to stop them completely. Fall back! Clara shouted, grabbing Elliot's arm and pulling him toward the exit. Marcus fired his weapon repeatedly, each shot illuminating the chamber briefly before plunging them back into darkness. As they fled the temple, the woman's laughter followed them, echoing through the mountains like a death knell. You cannot escape your destiny, Clara. The shadows will claim you. Back in Black Hollow, Clara sat alone in her apartment, staring at the dagger resting on her desk. Its glow had dimmed significantly since their encounter at the temple, but she knew it was only a matter of time before the shadows returned stronger than ever. She thought about the Keeper's words, that she couldn't escape her destiny. Was she destined to become a conduit for the shadows, just as Emily had been? Or was there still hope for redemption? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. When she opened it, she found Marcus standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look like hell, he said bluntly, handing her one of the cups. Thanks, Clara replied dryly, taking a sip. What brings you here? I wanted to check on you, Marcus admitted, his tone softening. You've been carrying this burden alone for too long. It's okay to lean on us, you know. Clara sighed, setting the cup down on the table. I appreciate it, Marcus. I really do. But sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to see this through. What if I fail? What if the shadows win? They won't, Marcus said firmly, because we're in this together, all of us. His words brought a small measure of comfort, but Clara knew the road ahead would be fraught with peril. The shadows were growing stronger, and their plans were far from complete. Somewhere out there, another gate awaited reopening, and with it, untold horrors ready to spill into their world. Later that evening, while reviewing the ancient book, Elliot stumbled upon a passage detailing a prophecy. When the Marked One rises, the barriers between realms shall crumble. Only through sacrifice can balance be restored. Clara read the words aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Sacrifice? What does that mean? Elliot frowned, flipping through the pages. It doesn't specify, but given everything we've seen so far, I think it's safe to assume it won't be easy. Clara closed the book, her mind racing. If the prophecy was true, then her role in this battle was far greater than she had imagined. She wasn't just a detective trying to solve a case. She was a pawn in a cosmic game, caught between forces beyond comprehension. As she stared out the window at the quiet streets of Black Hollow, she made a silent vow. No matter the cost, she would protect her town, her friends, and herself from the shadows, even if it meant making the ultimate sacrifice. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the whispers grew louder, cheering her resolve. Chapter 13, The Prophecy Unveiled. The prophecy weighed heavily on Clara's mind, its cryptic words gnawing at her thoughts like an unrelenting storm. When the Marked One rises, the barriers between realms shall crumble. Only through sacrifice can balance be restored. She couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows weren't just using her as a conduit. They were grooming her for something far worse. What if it's me? Clara asked during one of their late-night planning sessions in the secure room. Her voice was quiet but carried an undercurrent of dread. What if I'm the one who has to make the sacrifice? Marcus frowned, leaning forward in his chair. That's not going to happen. We'll find another way. Elliot, who had been poring over the ancient book, looked up with a troubled expression. The text doesn't leave much room for interpretation. It specifically mentions the Marked One, the person chosen by the shadows themselves. That's you, Clara. But why me? Clara pressed, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Why does it always come back to me? Because you're strong, Marcus interjected firmly. Stronger than anyone else they've tried to control. Maybe that's why they need you, but it's also why you have the power to stop them. Clara wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. The mark on her palm throbbed faintly, a constant reminder of the connection she shared with the shadows. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel their whispers coiling around her thoughts, urging her to embrace their darkness. We need more information, Elliot said finally, breaking the tension. If we can understand the prophecy better, maybe we can find a loophole, a way to restore balance without losing you. Clara nodded reluctantly. Where do we start? There's a place mentioned in the book, Elliot explained, flipping to a detailed map sketched in the margins. An ancient library buried beneath the ruins of an old cathedral. According to legend, it contains knowledge forbidden even to the cult. And where is this cathedral? Marcus asked skeptically. About 50 miles east of here, Elliot replied. If we leave tonight, we might reach it by morning. Clara hesitated, weighing the risks. The journey would take them deep into unfamiliar territory, away from the relative safety of Black Hollow. But staying put wasn't an option either, not when the shadows were growing stronger with each passing day. Let's go, she said finally, her resolve hardening. We don't have time to waste. The drive to the cathedral was long and tense, the road winding through dense forests and desolate plains. As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape, the ruins came into view, a crumbling structure overtaken by moss and ivy. Its once majestic spires now leaned precariously, as if burdened by the weight of centuries. This place gives me the creeps, Marcus muttered as they stepped out of the car. His hand hovered near his weapon, though he knew conventional means would be useless against whatever awaited them inside. Elliot led the way, consulting the map from the book as they navigated the overgrown grounds. The entrance to the underground library was hidden behind a false wall in the cathedral's nave. After some effort and a few choice curse words from Marcus, they managed to pry it open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Great, Marcus grumbled, pulling out his flashlight. More stairs, just what I needed. Clara ignored him, focusing instead on the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to grow heavier with each step. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and the walls were lined with faded murals depicting scenes of chaos and destruction. At the bottom of the staircase, they found themselves in a vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of dusty books and scrolls. This is it, Elliot whispered, his voice tinged with awe. The Library of Shadows. As they began searching for clues, Clara felt the whispers return, louder and more insistent than ever. They guided her hands to a specific shelf, where a leather-bound tome sat nestled among other forgotten volumes. When she opened it, the pages glowed faintly, revealing intricate diagrams and handwritten notes. It's a journal, Elliot said, scanning the text. Belonged to someone named Alaric, a scholar who studied the shadows centuries ago. Clara flipped through the pages, her heart sinking as she read passages detailing rituals, sacrifices, and warnings about the consequences of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. Then near the end, she found something that made her blood run cold. To break the cycle, the Marked One must sever the connection willingly. By offering herself as a vessel, she will become both destroyer and savior. Only then can the gates be sealed permanently. She slammed the book shut, her hands trembling. This isn't just about stopping the shadows. It's about becoming one of them. Elliot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll figure this out, Clara. There has to be another way. But Clara knew there wasn't. The prophecy, the journal, it all pointed to the same inevitable conclusion. If she wanted to save Black Hollow, she would have to sacrifice herself. As they prepared to leave the library, a sudden tremor shook the chamber, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. The ground split open, revealing a chasm filled with writhing black mist. From the abyss emerged a figure cloaked in shadow. Sheriff Grayson. You shouldn't have come here, he rasped, his voice distorted and unnatural. His eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the keeper's crystal staff. Grayson, Marcus exclaimed, his tone laced with disbelief. What are you doing here? I warned you, Grayson continued, ignoring Marcus's question. I told you the shadows always find a way, and now they found me. Before anyone could react, he lunged at Clara, wielding a dagger identical to hers. She barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side as the blade grazed her arm. Pain shot through her body, but adrenaline kept her moving. Stay back, Clara shouted, raising her own dagger defensively. Grayson laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. You can't fight fate, Clara. You belong to them now. With that, he swung again, forcing her to retreat further into the library. Marcus and Elliot tried to intervene, but tendrils of black smoke erupted from the chasm, blocking their path. You have to let me go, Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. It's the only way. No, Marcus yelled, struggling against the shadows. We're not giving up. But Clara knew there was no other choice. As Grayson advanced, she drove her dagger into the ground, channeling every ounce of energy she possessed into the blade. A blinding flash of light erupted, engulfing the chamber and obliterating everything within it. When the light faded, Clara stood alone amidst the ruins, her body trembling with exhaustion. The mark on her palm had vanished completely, leaving behind smooth, unblemished skin. For the first time in months, the whispers were silent. The days that followed were surreal, without the constant threat of the shadows looming over them. Life in Black Hollow returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such events. Clara threw herself into her work, determined to move forward and leave the past behind. But deep down, she knew the peace was fragile. The shadows had been weakened, not destroyed. And while the prophecy had been fulfilled, at least partially, she couldn't shake the feeling that her role in the grand design was far from over. One evening, as she walked home from the station, she noticed something odd, a single symbol carved into the bark of a tree along her path. It pulsed faintly, glowing softly in the twilight. Beneath it, scrawled in jagged handwriting, was a message. The cycle begins anew. Clara stared at the symbol, her heart pounding. The whispers hadn't returned, not yet, but she could feel their presence lingering just beyond the edge of perception, waiting for their moment to strike. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, the shadows stirred, eager to reclaim what they had lost. The symbol carved into the tree haunted Clara, not because of its appearance, but because of what it represented. It wasn't just a warning or a taunt. It was a declaration. The shadows weren't defeated. They were regrouping, biding their time until they could rise again. And the message beneath it, the cycle begins anew, was a stark reminder that the battle against them was far from over. Clara stood in front of the tree for several minutes, her mind racing. She had sacrificed so much to seal the gates, to sever the connection between realms. Yet here was proof that the shadows still lingered, their influence spreading like a cancer beneath the surface of reality. Her stomach churned with frustration and fear. Was nothing she did ever enough? Finally, she pulled out her phone and snapped a picture of the symbol before covering it with dirt to prevent anyone else from seeing it. If panic spread through Black Hollow, it would only make things worse. For now, this secret belonged solely to her. When she returned home, she found Marcus waiting for her on her doorstep, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "What is it?" Clara asked, unlocking the door and stepping inside. Marcus hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. "Elliot called me. He's been researching the symbol you found at the library, the one about cycles. Turns out it's more dangerous than we thought." "How so?" Clara asked, dropping her keys onto the table. "It's not just a prophecy," Marcus explained. "It's a countdown." Elliot arrived shortly after, clutching a stack of notes and maps. His hair was disheveled and dark circles ringed his eyes, a testament to the sleepless nights he had spent deciphering the ancient texts. "The symbol isn't static," Elliot began, spreading the materials across Clara's kitchen table. "It's part of a larger pattern, a series of events that repeat themselves every few centuries. Each cycle ends with the marked one making a sacrifice to restore balance. But here's the thing, the balance never lasts." "What do you mean?" Clara asked, leaning forward. "I mean," Elliot continued, "that each time the cycle resets, the shadows grow stronger. They adapt, evolve, and find new ways to breach the barriers between worlds. That's why the prophecy mentions both destruction and salvation. It's not just about stopping them temporarily, it's about delaying the inevitable." "So what happens when the cycle resets completely?" Marcus interjected, his voice tense. "That's the problem," Elliot admitted. "If the cycle completes without intervention, the barriers collapse entirely. And when that happens, well, let's just say humanity won't survive." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. "How much time do we have?" Elliot hesitated, flipping through his notes. "Based on the symbols appearing around town and the patterns described in the text, I'd estimate maybe 6 months. Tops." 6 months? Clara exclaimed, her voice rising. That's barely any time. I know, Elliot said apologetically, but there might be a way to stop it, if we act quickly. And how do we do that? Marcus demanded. We destroy the source, Elliot replied firmly. The shadows aren't just random entities floating around. They're fragments of something bigger, an entity known as Umbra Nox. Umbra Nox? Clara repeated, the name sending shivers down her spine. Yes, Elliot confirmed. According to legend, Umbra Nox is the original shadow, the progenitor of all the others. If we can find and destroy it, we might be able to end the cycle permanently. The trio spent the next several days poring over every scrap of information they could find about Umbra Nox. The ancient text described it as a being of pure darkness, older than time itself, existing in a realm beyond human comprehension. To confront it would require not only immense courage, but also tools capable of harming something so powerful. There's mention of an artifact called the Lumina Shard, Elliot explained during one of their research sessions. It's said to be the only weapon capable of harming Umbra Nox. And where do we find this shard? Marcus asked skeptically. That's the tricky part, Elliot admitted. It's hidden in a place called the Abyssal Nexus, a dimension accessible only during specific celestial alignments. Clara frowned, her mind working overtime. Celestial alignments? Like eclipses or something? Exactly, Elliot replied. The next alignment occurs in 3 months. If we want to reach the Abyssal Nexus, we'll need to prepare everything beforehand. As they discussed logistics, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping through their fingers. Every day brought new reports of strange occurrences around Black Hollow. Livestock disappearing, crops wilting overnight, and unexplained cold spots in homes. The shadows were growing bolder, testing their limits. One evening, while reviewing their plans, there was a knock at Clara's door. When she opened it, she found a young woman standing there, her face pale and drawn. She introduced herself as Lila Hart, a historian specializing in occult phenomena. I've been following your work, Lila said nervously, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone might be watching. I know about the shadows and Umbra Nox. How do you know about that? Clara asked sharply, her hand instinctively reaching for her dagger. I've studied it for years, Lila replied earnestly. My family has kept records of the shadows' activities for generations. We've always known the cycle would reset eventually, but no one believed it would happen in our lifetime. Clara exchanged a glance with Marcus and Elliot. Why are you telling us this? Because, Lila said, lowering her voice, I think I know how to help you. My ancestors left behind clues, maps, artifacts, rituals that could guide you to the Abyssal Nexus. But you'll need to trust me. Clara hesitated, weighing the risks. Something about Lila seemed genuine, but trusting strangers had proven disastrous in the past. Still, they couldn't afford to turn away potential allies. All right, Clara said finally. You're in. But if you betray us, there won't be a second chance. Lila nodded solemnly. Understood. With Lila's knowledge and resources, the group accelerated their preparations. They gathered rare materials needed for the ritual to open a portal to the Abyssal Nexus, including powdered moonstone, obsidian shards, and essence extracted from shadow-infused plants. Each item came with its own set of dangers, forcing them to venture into increasingly perilous territories. As the date of the celestial alignment approached, the atmosphere in Black Hollow grew heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. The symbols etched into walls and trees glowed brighter, pulsing in sync with the phases of the moon. Even the townsfolk, oblivious to the true nature of the threat, reported feeling uneasy, as though the air itself was alive with anticipation. On the night of the alignment, the group convened at an abandoned observatory on the outskirts of town. The ritual required precise timing and coordination, leaving no room for error. As Lila chanted incantations from an ancient scroll, Clara, Marcus, and Elliot arranged the artifacts in a circle around the central pedestal. When the final ingredient, a drop of Clara's blood, was added to the mix, the ground trembled violently, and a swirling vortex of darkness erupted in the center of the room. The temperature plummeted, and the whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever. Now or never, Clara muttered, gripping the Lumina Shard tightly. One by one, they stepped into the vortex, bracing themselves for whatever awaited them on the other side. The abyssal nexus was unlike anything they had ever seen. A vast expanse of shifting shadows and writhing tendrils, illuminated only by faint pinpricks of light resembling dying stars. At the heart of it all stood Umbra Nox, a towering figure composed entirely of darkness, its form constantly shifting and reforming. "You dare challenge me?" it boomed, its voice reverberating like thunder. "You are but insects in the grand design." "We're ending this," Clara declared, raising the Lumina Shard. Its glow intensified, cutting through the oppressive darkness like a beacon of hope. Umbra Nox laughed, a deep guttural sound that shook the very fabric of the realm. "You cannot destroy what is eternal." But Clara didn't hesitate. With a cry of defiance, she lunged forward, driving the shard into the entity's core. A blinding explosion of light erupted, obliterating everything within sight. When the light faded, the abyssal nexus was gone, replaced by an empty void. Clara collapsed to her knees, exhausted but victorious. Or so she thought. Back in Black Hollow, life slowly returned to normal, or so it seemed. The symbols stopped appearing, and the whispers fell silent. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Late one night, as she reviewed the ancient text once more, she stumbled upon a passage she hadn't noticed before. "When Umbra Nox falls, the cycle resets. But beware, for the shadows are not the enemy. They are the symptom. The true adversary lies within." Her blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The shadows were merely pawns in a much larger game, and the real mastermind was closer than she had ever imagined. Somewhere deep within her own mind, the whispers stirred once more, whispering a single phrase. "Welcome back, Clara." The phrase echoed in Clara's mind long after she had closed the ancient book. "Welcome back, Clara." It wasn't just a taunt. It was a greeting, as if the shadows recognized her on a level far deeper than she could comprehend. She sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the Lumina Shard resting on her desk. Its faint glow pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. What did the text mean? The shadows are not the enemy. They are the symptom. The true adversary lies within. Was it suggesting that the real threat wasn't Umbra Nox, or even the shadows, but something inside her? Clara clenched her fists, frustration boiling over. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered aloud. "How can I be the enemy? I've spent months fighting against them." But deep down, she couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt. The mark on her palm had faded, but its presence lingered in her memories, a reminder of the connection she had shared with the shadows. And then there were the whispers, which had never truly left her mind. They weren't external forces anymore. They felt like fragments of her own thoughts, twisted and distorted. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her reverie. It was Marcus. "Hey," he said when she answered. "Elliot and I found something you need to see." "What is it?" Clara asked, her tone sharp with unease. "It's about your family," Marcus replied hesitantly. "We didn't want to bring it up earlier because, well, it's complicated." Clara's stomach tightened. "Tell me." When Clara arrived at the station, Marcus and Elliot were waiting for her in the secure room. On the table lay a stack of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes, all tied to her parents. "What is all this?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We started digging into your background after Lila mentioned that some families have been tracking the shadows for generations," Elliot explained. "Turns out your parents were part of one of those families." Clara frowned, trying to process the information. Her parents had always been private people, but she had never suspected they were involved in anything supernatural. "Why didn't they tell me?" "They tried to protect you," Marcus said gently. "From what we've gathered, your family has been marked by the shadows for centuries. Every generation produces someone who becomes connected to them." Clara shook her head, refusing to believe it. "That can't be true. If my parents knew about this, they would have told me." "Maybe they wanted to keep you safe," Elliot interjected. "Or maybe they thought it wouldn't happen during your lifetime. Either way, it explains why the shadows chose you." Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the revelation. Everything, the mark, the whispers, the prophecy, It all led back to her bloodline. She wasn't just a random target, she was a pawn in a game that had spanned generations. But there's more, Marcus added hesitantly. Your parents weren't just observers, they were participants. What do you mean? Clara demanded, her voice rising. They conducted rituals, Elliot admitted, flipping through the documents. Not to summon the shadows, but to contain them. Your mother in particular was skilled at creating wards and barriers to keep them at bay. And my father? Clara asked, dread pooling in her stomach. He experimented, Marcus said carefully. He believed that understanding the shadows could lead to finding a permanent solution. Some of his notes suggest he may have even communicated with them directly. Clara felt sick. So I'm not just connected to the shadows. I'm descended from people who played with fire. It's possible, Elliot said softly, but it's also possible that their work laid the foundation for what you're doing now. You're finishing what they started. Clara stood abruptly, pacing the room. Number, this isn't about finishing anything. It's about surviving. And right now, I don't know how much longer I can survive this. Over the next few days, Clara became increasingly withdrawn, haunted by the knowledge of her family's involvement. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent sentences that whispered promises of power and control. You don't have to fight us, they murmured. Join us and you'll understand everything. She tried to resist, focusing on mundane tasks and throwing herself into her work. But no matter how hard she pushed them away, the whispers always returned, insidious and persistent. One night, unable to sleep, she decided to revisit the abandoned quarry where they had sealed the first gate. The place was eerily quiet, the air thick with an oppressive stillness. As she approached the shattered altar, she noticed something odd, faint symbols glowing softly in the cracks of the stone. Before she could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the Keeper of Secrets, her veil billowing in the wind despite the absence of breeze. You've come seeking answers, the woman said, her voice echoing unnaturally. But are you prepared for the truth? What truth? Clara asked sharply, raising the luminous shard defensively. The truth about yourself, the Keeper replied, stepping closer. About why the shadows chose you. Clara hesitated, lowering the shard slightly. What are you talking about? The shadows didn't choose you randomly, the Keeper continued. They chose you because you're already one of them. That's not possible, Clara snapped, though her voice wavered. It is, the Keeper insisted. Your parents' experiments opened a door, a connection between you and the shadows. You were born with their essence woven into your soul. That's why you hear their whispers, feel their presence. They're not outside you, Clara. They're part of you. The revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. All this time she had thought she was fighting against the shadows, but in reality, she had been fighting against herself. As the Keeper spoke, memories began flooding back. Memories Clara hadn't realized were suppressed. She saw flashes of her childhood, strange dreams filled with whispering voices, moments when objects moved without explanation, feelings of being watched even in empty rooms. Her parents hadn't been protecting her. They had been containing her. I don't believe you, Clara whispered, tears streaming down her face. I can't be. I'm not. You are, the Keeper said firmly. But it doesn't have to be a curse. Embrace it, and you'll gain power beyond imagination. Deny it, and you'll destroy yourself, and everyone around you. Clara stumbled backward, clutching her head as the whispers erupted into a deafening roar. Images flashed before her eyes. The forest, the ritual, the dagger plunging into the ground. And then a single phrase repeated endlessly, the cycle resets with you. Clara returned to Black Hollow, shaken but resolute. She couldn't deny the truth any longer. The shadows weren't just external entities. They were a part of her. But knowing that didn't make the choice any easier. If she embraced the darkness, she could harness its power to protect the town, to seal the gates permanently. But at what cost? Would she lose herself in the process, becoming the very thing she had fought so hard to destroy? Or could she find another way, a way to sever the connection without succumbing to the shadows? As she stood on the edge of the forest, the dagger in her hand glowing faintly, she made a silent vow. Whatever happened next, she would face it head-on. Because the cycle didn't end with her, it began anew. And somewhere, Deep within the shadows, a voice whispered softly, "We've been waiting for you, Clara." The days following her encounter with the Keeper were a blur for Clara. She moved through her routine mechanically, her mind consumed by the revelation that the shadows weren't just external forces, they were entwined with her very essence. Every shadow cast by the sun, every whisper in the wind, felt like a reminder of what she had become, or perhaps what she had always been. She tried to confide in Marcus and Elliot, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? That she wasn't just fighting against the shadows, she was the shadows. They would see her differently, fear her, maybe even turn against her. And yet, keeping it to herself was suffocating. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment staring at the Lumina Shard, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Lila standing there, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," Lila said simply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "What is it?" Lila placed a worn leather journal on the table. "This belonged to my grandmother. It contains records of people like you, those marked by the shadows." "People like me?" Clara repeated, her voice hollow. "Yes," Lila confirmed. "Individuals born with a connection to the darkness. Some embraced it willingly, becoming conduits for the shadow's power. Others resisted, often at great personal cost." "And what happened to them?" Clara asked, dreading the answer. "They either died trying to sever the connection," Lila replied grimly, "or they succumbed to the whispers and became vessels for Umbra Nox." Clara sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "So I'm destined to fail no matter what I do?" "Not necessarily," Lila countered. "There's another path, one my grandmother hinted at, but never fully explained. A way to balance the light and the dark within you." "How?" Clara demanded, leaning forward. "Tell me everything." Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It involves accepting your connection to the shadows, not as a curse, but as a part of who you are. By acknowledging it, you can learn to control it instead of letting it control you." Clara shook her head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "That's insane. If I accept it, I'll lose myself completely." "Maybe," Lila admitted. "Or maybe you'll find a strength you didn't know you had. Either way, time is running out. The cycle resets soon, and if you don't make a choice, the shadows will decide for you." Lila's words lingered in Clara's mind long after their conversation ended. Could she really embrace the darkness within her without losing herself entirely? The thought terrified her, but so did the alternative, becoming a puppet for Umbra Nox, a force she could barely comprehend. To distract herself, she threw herself into research, poring over the ancient texts in Lila's grandmother's journal. What she discovered both fascinated and horrified her. The shadows weren't inherently evil. They were fragments of primal energy, neither good nor bad. It was humanity's fear and greed that twisted them into malevolent entities. But understanding didn't make the burden any lighter. With each passing day, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They weren't content to remain passive observers anymore. They wanted her attention, her acceptance. And when she resisted, they retaliated. One night, while walking home from the station, Clara felt an overwhelming surge of cold wash over her. The streetlights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the pavement. Then from the corner of her eye, she saw them. Figures cloaked in darkness, their glowing eyes fixed on her. "You cannot run forever," one of them hissed, its voice layered with countless others. Clara tightened her grip on the Lumina Shard, raising it defensively. "Stay back!" The figures laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed through the empty streets. "You wield our power, yet deny us. Why resist what you cannot escape?" Before she could respond, the ground beneath her feet trembled violently, and tendrils of black smoke erupted from the cracks, wrapping around her arms and legs. Pain shot through her body as the shadows burned her skin, forcing her to her knees. "Let go!" she screamed, driving the shard into the ground. A burst of light erupted, temporarily dispelling the shadows, but it wasn't enough to banish them completely. As she staggered to her feet, gasping for air, she realized something crucial. Resisting the shadows only made them stronger. Maybe Lila was right. Maybe acceptance was the key to controlling them. The next morning, Clara called an emergency meeting with Marcus, Elliot, and Lila. They gathered in the secure room, the atmosphere tense as she laid out her plan. "I need to confront the shadows directly," Clara announced, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "If I can face them, at their source, I might be able to reclaim control." Marcus frowned, clearly uneasy. "Are you sure about this? Last time we faced them head-on, it nearly killed us." "It's the only way," Clara insisted. "Every time I resist, they grow stronger. But if I accept them, if I acknowledge their presence, they might weaken." Elliot nodded slowly, flipping through the ancient book. "There's precedent for this. Some texts suggest that embracing the shadows allows the Marked One to act as a bridge between realms, rather than a conduit for destruction. But it's risky," Lila added cautiously. "If you lose focus, even for a moment, you could become exactly what we're trying to stop." "I know," Clara replied softly, "but I have to try." The group prepared meticulously for Clara's confrontation with the shadows. Using the knowledge gleaned from Lila's grandmother's journal and the ancient texts, they devised a ritual designed to amplify Clara's connection to the shadows while protecting her mind from being overwhelmed. On the night of the ritual, they convened at the edge of the forest, where the boundary between worlds was thinnest. Clara stood at the center of a circle drawn with powdered moonstone and obsidian shards, the luminous shard clutched tightly in her hand. Around her, Marcus, Elliot, and Lila chanted incantations, their voices rising and falling in unison. As the ritual reached its climax, the ground began to tremble, and a swirling vortex of darkness erupted above Clara. The whispers returned, louder and more chaotic than ever, forming a cacophony of voices that threatened to drown out her thoughts. "Join us," they urged. "Become one with the void." Clara closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. She visualized the shadows not as enemies, but as extensions of herself, fragments of her soul given form. Slowly, she lowered the luminous shard, allowing the darkness to envelop her. For a moment, she felt nothing but pain, as if her very essence were being torn apart. Then gradually, the pain subsided, replaced by a strange sense of clarity. She opened her eyes to find herself standing in a vast expanse of shifting shadows, illuminated only by faint pinpricks of light. At the center of it all stood Umbra Nox, its towering form composed entirely of darkness. But instead of attacking, it regarded her curiously, its voice resonating like thunder. "You have accepted us," it rumbled. "Why?" "Because I am not your enemy," Clara replied firmly, "and neither are you mine." Umbra Nox tilted its head, as if considering her words. "Then what do you seek?" "A balance," Clara said. "A way for us to coexist without destroying each other." The entity was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, it extended a tendril of darkness toward her. Clara hesitated, then reached out, grasping it with her own hand. A surge of energy coursed through her body, filling her with a power she had never imagined possible. When she returned to the physical world, the ritual circle was gone, replaced by an empty clearing bathed in moonlight. Marcus, Elliot, and Lila stared at her in awe, their expressions a mix of relief and disbelief. "What happened?" Marcus asked finally. Clara smiled faintly, though her eyes carried a newfound weight. "I found a way to live with the shadows. Now it's up to me to ensure they don't consume us." Life in Black Hollow returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such events. The symbols stopped appearing, and the whispers fell silent. But Clara knew the peace was fragile. The shadows were still there, lingering just beneath the surface, waiting for their moment to rise again. Yet she no longer feared them. Instead, she embraced the connection, using her newfound power to maintain the balance between realms. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she questioned whether she had made the right choice. But deep down, she knew one thing for certain. The cycle hadn't ended. It had transformed. And as long as she remained vigilant, the shadows would never fully claim her. Somewhere in the depths of the forest, a single symbol glowed faintly, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. Beneath it, scrawled in jagged handwriting, was a message: "The balance holds, for now." And somewhere, deep within Clara's mind, The whispers stirred once more, whispering softly, "Well done, Clara." In the weeks following her confrontation with Umbra Knox, Clara found herself navigating a delicate equilibrium. The shadows were no longer enemies, but they weren't allies either. They existed within her, a constant presence that whispered promises of power and destruction. She had learned to silence their more insidious urges, but the effort required immense focus and mental fortitude. At first, the townsfolk of Black Hollow seemed oblivious to the change in her. To them, she was still Detective Clara Hayes, the woman who had saved their town from unspeakable horrors. But those closest to her, Marcus, Elliot, and Lila, noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. Her eyes carried a faint glow at times, and her movements were sharper, almost unnaturally precise. When questioned, she brushed it off as exhaustion or stress, unwilling to burden them with the truth. Deep down, however, Clara knew the balance she had achieved was precarious. The shadows weren't gone. They were waiting, biding their time until they could exploit any weakness in her resolve. And the whispers, though quieter now, never fully disappeared. They lingered at the edges of her consciousness, murmuring reminders of what she had become. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Marcus said one evening as they sat together in the station's break room. "You haven't slept properly in days." "I'm fine," Clara replied automatically, though the dark circles under her eyes betrayed her words. "Just adjusting." "Adjusting to what?" Marcus pressed, his tone firm but concerned. "Clara, you've been through hell. You don't have to pretend everything's okay." Clara hesitated, gripping her coffee mug tightly. How could she explain that she wasn't just dealing with trauma or fatigue? That every moment of her existence felt like walking a tightrope between light and darkness, knowing one misstep could plunge her and everyone around her into chaos? "I'll figure it out," she said finally, forcing a weak smile. "I always do." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were true. The fragile peace in Black Hollow was shattered one fateful night when a series of unexplained disappearances began plaguing the town. At first it seemed random, a missing hiker here, a vanished shopkeeper there. But as the cases mounted, a pattern emerged. All the victims had been last seen near the forest, and each disappearance was accompanied by strange symbols carved into nearby trees. Clara recognized the symbols immediately. They were similar to the ones she had encountered before, but altered slightly, as if twisted into something darker and more malevolent. When she touched one of the carvings, a surge of energy coursed through her body, followed by a single chilling whisper. "They are coming." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked when she recounted the experience later that day. "I don't know," Clara admitted, rubbing her temples. "But it can't be good." Elliot flipped through the ancient texts, searching for answers. "These symbols aren't from the cult of the Whispering Shadows, or at least not entirely. They're hybridized, as if someone combined different rituals to create something new. And whoever did this knows about you," Lila added grimly. "They're using the shadows against us." Clara frowned, her mind racing. "If they're targeting me, then this isn't just about causing chaos. It's personal." Before anyone could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled violently, and a deafening roar echoed through the station. The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for several seconds before stabilizing. When the power returned, Clara noticed something odd, a faint shadow lingering on the wall, unmoving despite the absence of light. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The next morning, Clara and her team ventured into the forest, following the trail of symbols left behind by the mysterious perpetrators. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it the faint scent of sulfur and decay. As they approached a clearing, they found themselves surrounded by figures cloaked in darkness, their forms shifting and distorting unnaturally. One of them stepped forward, lowering its hood to reveal a face that sent chills down Clara's spine. It was Sheriff Grayson, or rather, what remained of him. His eyes glowed with an eerie light, and his voice was layered with countless others when he spoke. "We are the Shadowbound," he rasped, his tone devoid of emotion. "Servants of the Void, reborn through sacrifice." "What do you want?" Clara demanded, raising the Lumina shard defensively. "To reclaim what is ours," Grayson replied, gesturing toward her. "You disrupted the cycle, Clara." Now we must restore it. Before she could react, the Shadowbound lunged at them, their movements unnaturally fast and fluid. Clara swung the shard, its light cutting through the darkness and temporarily dispelling the attackers. But for everyone she banished, two more took its place. "We can't keep this up," Marcus shouted, firing his weapon repeatedly. Each shot illuminated the clearing briefly before plunging them back into chaos. "Fall back," Clara ordered, grabbing Elliot's arm and pulling him toward the edge of the forest. "We need reinforcements." But as they retreated, she realized the truth. Reinforcements wouldn't be enough. The Shadowbound weren't ordinary adversaries. They were fragments of Umbra Nox itself, given form and purpose. To defeat them, Clara would need to confront the source of their power. Back at the station, Clara pored over the ancient texts in Lila's grandmother's journal, searching for a way to neutralize the Shadowbound. What she discovered chilled her to the core. The creatures weren't merely servants of Umbra Nox. They were extensions of it, born from the remnants of the entity's essence after her ritual. "This is my fault," Clara muttered, slamming the book shut. "When I embraced the shadows, I weakened the barriers between realms. Now Umbra Nox is spreading its influence directly." "There has to be a way to stop it," Lila insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "Your connection to the shadows gives you power. Remember? Use it." "But at what cost?" Clara snapped, frustration boiling over. "Every time I tap into their energy, I risk losing control. If I go too far—" "You won't," Marcus interrupted firmly, "because we're here to pull you back if you do." Clara stared at him, gratitude and guilt warring within her. She knew he meant well, but the stakes were higher than ever. If she failed, the entire town, and possibly the world, would fall under Umbra Nox's dominion. Armed with newfound determination, Clara led her team back to the forest, where the Shadowbound had gathered in greater numbers. At the center of the clearing stood a massive rift, a swirling vortex of darkness that pulsed with malevolent energy. From within it emerged a towering figure composed entirely of shadows, its form constantly shifting and reforming. "Umbra Nox," Clara whispered, her voice filled with equal parts awe and dread. "You sought balance," the entity boomed, its voice reverberating like thunder. "But balance is an illusion. There can only be unity, through submission." "I won't let you destroy this world," Clara declared, stepping forward. "Not while I still draw breath." Umbra Nox tilted its head, studying her curiously. "You misunderstand, child. I do not seek destruction, I seek perfection, and you, Marked One, are the key to achieving it." With that, the Shadowbound surged forward, their glowing eyes fixed on Clara. She raised the Lumina Shard, channeling the shadow's energy through it to create a barrier of light. The creatures recoiled momentarily, but their numbers were overwhelming. "Clara, use your power!" Lila shouted, clutching the ancient book. "Embrace the shadows completely." Clara hesitated, torn between fear and necessity. Embracing the shadows fully might give her the strength to defeat Umbra Nox, but it could also consume her entirely. Yet as the Shadowbound closed in, she realized she had no other choice. Closing her eyes, she allowed the whispers to flood her mind, surrendering to their presence. A surge of energy erupted from her body, engulfing the clearing in blinding light. When she opened her eyes, she found herself transformed, her skin shimmering with an ethereal glow, her hair streaked with strands of pure darkness. "Enough!" she commanded, her voice resonating with authority. With a wave of her hand, she unleashed a torrent of energy that obliterated the Shadowbound and sealed the rift. As the light faded, Umbra Nox regarded her silently, its form flickering uncertainly. "You have surpassed my expectations, Marked One. Perhaps balance is possible after all." And with that, the entity dissolved into nothingness, leaving Clara standing alone amidst the ruins of the forest. When Clara returned to Black Hollow, she was hailed as a hero once again, but she knew the truth. The victory had come at a cost. The shadows were now an inseparable part of her, their whispers louder and more insistent than ever. She had gained unimaginable power, but at the risk of losing herself entirely. Late one night, as she stood on the edge of the forest, she noticed something odd. A single symbol carved into a tree, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Beneath it, Scrawled in jagged handwriting was a message. The cycle resets with you. Clara smiled faintly, though her eyes carried a newfound weight. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. The shadows would always be watching. The symbol carved into the tree lingered in Clara's mind long after she had returned home. Its message, the cycle resets with you, was both a warning and an inevitability. She had fought tirelessly to protect Black Hollow, to maintain the fragile balance between light and darkness. But now, as the whispers grew louder and more insistent, she realized that her role in this cosmic struggle was far from over. Every victory had come at a cost. Emily Carter's death, Sheriff Grayson's corruption, the countless lives disrupted by the shadows, all of it weighed heavily on her shoulders. And yet, despite everything, she had persevered. She had embraced the darkness within her, wielding its power to protect those she loved. But the question remained, how much longer could she sustain this dual existence? How much of herself would she lose before the shadows consumed her entirely? Clara knew the time had come to make a choice, not just for herself, but for everyone she cared about. The cycle couldn't reset indefinitely. Sooner or later, something or someone would have to break it permanently. Over the next few days, strange occurrences began plaguing Black Hollow once again. Livestock disappeared without a trace, crops wilted overnight, and unexplained cold spots spread through homes like a creeping frost. The townsfolk whispered nervously among themselves, their fear palpable. Even Marcus, Elliot, and Lila noticed the growing tension. "It's happening again," Marcus said one evening as they convened in the secure room. "Whatever you did to stop Umbra Nox, it didn't last." "I know," Clara admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. "The shadows are restless. They're testing me, pushing me to my limits." Elliot flipped through the ancient texts, his brow furrowed in concentration. "There's something else. These symbols appearing around town, they're not random. They're forming a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" Clara asked sharply. "A convergence," Elliot replied grimly. "They're leading to a specific location, the heart of the forest." Clara's stomach tightened. That's where it all started, where Emily died. "And where it'll end," Lila added softly. "If you don't act soon, the cycle will complete itself. Umbra Nox will rise again, and this time, there won't be a way to stop it." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll face it head on, alone." "No," Marcus interjected firmly. "We're in this together. You've carried this burden long enough." "Marcus is right," Elliot agreed. "You don't have to do this by yourself." Clara hesitated, gratitude swelling in her chest. But deep down she knew the truth. This was her fight. Her connection to the shadows made her the only one capable of ending the cycle, for better or worse. "I appreciate it," she said finally, meeting their eyes one by one. "But this is something I have to finish on my own." Clara ventured into the forest alone, guided by the glowing symbols etched into trees and rocks. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the earth itself were resisting her presence. The air grew colder, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and sulfur. As she approached the clearing where the convergence was taking place, she found herself surrounded by swirling shadows, their forms shifting and distorting unnaturally. At the center of the clearing stood a massive altar, identical to the one she had encountered months earlier. Above it hovered a swirling vortex of darkness, pulsing with malevolent energy. From within it emerged Umbra Nox, its towering form composed entirely of shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on her. "You have come," the entity boomed, its voice reverberating like thunder, "to witness the culmination of your efforts." "I'm here to end this," Clara declared, raising the Lumina shard. Its glow intensified, cutting through the oppressive darkness like a beacon of hope. Umbra Nox tilted its head, studying her curiously. "You believe you can destroy me? I am eternal, child, a force beyond comprehension." "You may be eternal," Clara countered, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "But I'm not afraid of you anymore." With that, she stepped forward, driving the shard into the altar. A blinding flash of light erupted, obliterating the shadows and sealing the rift. But as the light faded, Clara realized the true cost of her actions. The Lumina shard had shattered, its fragments dissolving into nothingness. Without it, she was vulnerable, completely exposed to the shadow's influence. As the clearing fell silent, Clara felt the whispers return, louder and more chaotic than ever. They weren't external forces anymore. They were part of her, woven into her very essence. She sank to her knees, clutching her head as the voices threatened to overwhelm her. "Join us," they urged. "Become one with the void." Clara closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. She thought of Marcus, Elliot, Lila, and all the people she had sworn to protect. She thought of Emily, whose life had been cut tragically short, and she thought of herself, the person she used to be before the shadows claimed her. "I won't let you win," she whispered, her voice filled with quiet determination. With a surge of energy, she channeled the shadows' power inward, using their essence to sever the connection between realms permanently. The pain was excruciating, as if her very soul were being torn apart. But as the shadows dissolved into nothingness, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The whispers faded, replaced by silence, a stillness she hadn't experienced in months. When she opened her eyes, she found herself standing in the middle of the forest, bathed in sunlight. The symbols etched into the trees had vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world felt normal. Back in Black Hollow, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The townsfolk went about their daily routines, blissfully unaware of the horrors that had unfolded just beyond their doorstep. Marcus, Elliot, and Lila tried to move on, though they couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was missing. One evening, as Marcus walked through the forest, he stumbled upon a single tree marked with a faint symbol. Beneath it, scrawled in jagged handwriting, was a message: "Thank you for believing in me." Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the truth. Clara had sacrificed herself to ensure the shadows would never return. She had become the balance, a guardian watching over Black Hollow from beyond the veil. And somewhere in the depths of the forest, a soft whisper echoed on the wind. "The cycle has ended."